Hi everyone, my name is Katherine Hicks and this is my Journalism 108 final project. For my final project, I decided to explore diversity and specifically how it's represented in children's literature. I'm hoping to be a future educator in early elementary education, and something that we've been talking a lot about in several of our teacher education courses in MSU have been children's books. And I thought, what better media topic to explore than diversity in children's books? So right off the bat, something that needs to be addressed is the ethnic makeup of several of the classrooms around the United States. As this picture illustrates, not all classrooms are really diverse. In this picture, you can see all the children are white students, and obviously this isn't the case in every classroom, but unfortunately it is a reality. So how does this ethnic makeup of our classroom translate to children's books? In this picture, you can see a lot of amazing children's books that have been written for many, many years. I'm sure several of you can look at this picture and identify with one or two of these books. But something you may not think of is what is the ethnic makeup of several of the primary characters in this picture. For example, Curious George, white male. In Clifford, we have the dog and Emily Elizabeth, who is another white female. Amelia Bedelia, white female. And even some of the books whose main characters may be animals, such as the rainbow fish, or Stella Luna, or If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. The language and the diction that's used in each of these books are very representative of the white culture. And, those are things that you really don't think about when you're picking up a children's book. And this leads me to my kind of thesis of my final project, being that many groups continually are underrepresented in children's literature. And subsequently, this perpetuates the ignorance by children as they grow up. They see things through one specific lens, which is through the white lens. And it causes no resolution to problems such as stereotyping and things of that nature. As you can see on this slide, there's a quote taken from Tatum in 1997, and it says, "I'm not ethnic, I'm just normal." Tatum explains in his article that as he starts out exercises, he'll frequently ask people to introduce themselves by saying their ethnic makeup and their background. And one white woman said, "Well, I'm not ethnic, I'm just normal." So if you kind of bring that back to this situation, this white individual happened to be a teacher. And what does this say about how people are viewing themselves and how they're understanding ethnicity and diversity in the classroom? And the teachers are subsequently picking the class libraries. So what does that say about their library? Maybe it's reflective of the way that they think. In this picture, you can see all sorts of stereotypes that we have. For example, Muslims are not all terrorists. That the stereotype, the underlying stereotype there is that Muslims are all terrorists. And these are things that are just kind of getting perpetuated over and over and over. And what we can see as a result of that is one story. That is that children are developing this one idea or conception of specific groups of individuals because they don't know any different. They're not exposed to any other story other than the one they're told on TV, or maybe if they can read, maybe they read one story about the news in the newspaper, and that is kind of dictating all what they think of that group as a whole. A perfect example of this is one specific group of people, which are Native Americans. In this picture, you can see a chief of some tribe, and he's wearing an elaborate headdress. Well, historically, if you look into Native Americans, you can find out that they actually didn't really wear headdresses, especially the ones that, the typical ones that we see on Halloween costumes and such, with the one band and one feather. A lot of times people will think of Native Americans as naked and they're dancing around a fire, such as in this illustration. And you really have to ask yourself, why do people think that way? Why are individuals of all ages coming up with this conception of Native Americans? And the answer can kind of be rooted back to the lack of diversity and diverse stories that children are hearing at a young age. What are they exposed to? Pocahontas. They're exposed to Disney or other representations such as Peter Pan. All of those kind of childish versions and elaborate versions of Native Americans, but they're not really being exposed to the true version of what a Native American is, or what kind of traditions that they hold, or they're kind of seeing things in maybe a one-dimensional aspect, is that this is the only way, this is the only story that Native Americans have, is that they're these crazy Native people who are nothing like me, and it might cause them to distance themselves from other people in their classroom. So if we understand or we believe this idea that one story is being represented to children or is being perpetuating the problem, then it starts to beg the question, how do we fix that? And the answer may be to diversify the children's books that are in the libraries, in the classrooms. And one example of this, if we're continuing on with the Native American example, is The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. This is a representative story of a person that he kind of confronts and challenges this idea of the stereotypes that are present. This picture specifically was taken straight from the book, a perfect example of this. And the small boy in the middle is the Native American, and all the people around him, kind of intimidating him, are the white people. So he says in his illustrations. And they're all identifying names and calling him all these sorts of terrible vulgarities, such as squaw boy and sitting bull. And one thing that's good about this book is that it takes those stereotypes and it kind of crushes them. This is just a regular boy. He is not kind of the idea or the conception, doesn't fit the stereotype that everyone else may already have prior to this book. And then it kind of confronts them, and it shows that he's a person, and he's similar to everyone else, and he has just the same problems. But at this point, you might be asking yourself, well, I've been to a bunch of classrooms, and the children are really diverse. Maybe the library would be representative of the children in the classroom. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. According to Ting Toomey in the textbook that they wrote in 2012, many children in diverse classrooms are struggling with their bicultural identity. A bicultural identity includes individuals' recognition of two cultural groups and the integration of corresponding characteristics from those groups. Decisions about which group to identify with, which label they prefer, and context that triggers an identity are part of the bicultural identity struggles among children and adolescents. So this quote tells us that children that are diverse in a classroom like this are struggling with finding themselves and deciding how they're going to identify themselves. So let's look at the facts. In an article that was done by Santora in 2013, it claims that 3.3% of books were written about African Americans, 2.1% about Asian Pacific Americans, and 1.5% about Latinos. So let's wrap our mind around this. 40% of the population are African American, and yet we only have 0.3% of books written about them. So how is this affecting children? Well, in the same article it says, by not seeing themselves, that is, children not seeing themselves reflected in books, it can make the children feel devalued. However, if they read books where people that are similar to them are the heroes, they can relate to that and set the scene for fostering children's respect for diversity and may actually help them prosper. So essentially, we want to pick books that children are mirrored as the heroes or that can help them grow as an individual. And by picking diverse literature, we can make this happen. We can do it. And it may seem kind of overwhelming because although there are some books written about diversity or different cultures, they're not all good. Earlier, I used the example of Native Americans, and one great book that can be used as a resource for that. Another one is Jerk, California. And if we examine this book, and just like the other book, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, this book is about a child with a disability. But instead of the whole book being about the disability and calling that a cultural experience, we can focus in on the person. And yes, it deals with his disability, but the whole book isn't about it. It's about a child growing who just happens to have a disability. And that may be the key to picking successful, diverse literature and including that in our classroom. So, I mean, we learned that there isn't much to start with, but now we've got to pick more. I mean, it may seem overwhelming, but, it's something that we have to do. There was an article written by Jackson, and there's a great quote in here. It says, "The field of education is forcing white pre-service teachers who have monocultural lives and immature experiences to view new perspectives that are critical and counter to their sense of reality." So even though it may be difficult as a teacher to locate this idea of diversity, and it might be really hard to find books that are quality, it's essential. I mean, the statistics are out there. Children will improve when they see themselves reflected in literature. Not to mention there are several different campaigns that are trying to diversify the books that are getting published or that are getting printed, helping authors get off their feet. One of these is We Need Diverse Books campaign. You can Google it. It's fantastic. It's a great website that really, like I said, encourages people to start printing books and unique, valuable, and authentic experiences from all different cultures. And I mean, that's the kind of thing we need. We need to expound upon the already existing diverse literature, and we need to make sure that the literature that we are putting in our classroom is reflective of several different stories so that we're not just replacing an old story with a new story, but we're giving children several different stories and helping them to nurture their bicultural identity if they happen to be from two cultures, or even if it's just one culture, we're helping them to grow as an individual and get a more rounded view of the world and of different cultures in general. If we think back to one of the very, very beginning pictures, it was that collage of all the different children's books. And they're cute and they're amazing, and they teach lessons and they're fun to read to your students. And we can embrace that. But we have to realize that those books aren't diverse, and we need to create a new story, a multiple layered, large understanding of diversity and of other cultures in general. And the only way that we're going to do that is by reading a bunch of different books, creating a well-rounded library, and getting more diverse, quality books on the bookshelves. A woman named Chimamanda Adichie mentioned in a TED Talk once that a single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is that maybe that they're not untrue, but they're incomplete, and they make one story, and that one story becomes the only story. Let's make sure that doesn't happen and put more diverse books on the bookshelf. Thanks for listening.